Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our carrier panel. We have two carriers with us today. Right now, we've got Lorena Camargo from Pearl Trans Logistics, and we will have Harold Boyette with Blue Streak joining us. He let us know he might be running a couple minutes behind, so he might hop on here in a minute. But we're going to go ahead and get started talking about becoming a shipper of choice. Is it actually still a thing? Can you be a shipper of choice? Is it just a phrase that publications are talking about to get you to click on articles? Do carriers really have a preference? Or is it really just about relationship and what goes into that relationship with the carriers to protect your capacity? We saw a resurgence of that phrase, the shipper of choice phrase, come about after the peak pandemic we had last year, where there was a big fight over capacity. Where is it coming from? Is there enough to go around? There was, I think, over 1 million orders that didn't make it in time for Christmas. So as that topic came back about, and as the capacity shortage really hasn't stopped, the pandemic still has people ordering more online. There's a lot more demand than there used to be. It's time to look at your relationship with those carriers and make sure that you have a good enough relationship to protect your capacity. So we're going to go straight to the source, talking to those carriers about their opinion on being a shipper of choice, how to improve those relationships, and what goes into it. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to Lorena with Pearl Trans to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her.
Sure. Hi, my name is Lorena Camargo. I'm the CEO and founder of Pearl Trans Logistics. We're based in sunny Southern California, except today it's kind of drizzling. We are a courier company. We service California. The majority of the work we do is on demand, but we do some routed. And we've been in business since 2011, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Well, Lorena, we're so excited to have you. I know you've done a lot of work. She works with CLDA and some other associations working with other carriers, so she's a great expert to have on here to hear about her experience with relationships. So while we're still waiting for Harold, I'll go ahead and get started. First question, can you be a shipper of choice? Is that an actual thing?
Yes. And actually, I hadn't heard the term till recently, but I mean, just like along the years, it's probably something that we kind of didn't want to admit for so long. But just again, with the constraints in the supply chain recently, that term has come about, and there is a certain preference because of so many factors.
Sure. So when you're defining a shipper of choice for your company, do you believe that it's different for you than it would be for another carrier company?
Yes, yeah, for sure. Just based on like the resources that we have, and also like where we see ourselves, in long term, whether a year or 3 years, if that relationship or that workload fits into what we're doing.
Sure. So it really does come down to just your relationship with that shipper. And how might a shipper of choice be treated differently than just another shipper that you work with?
Well, for sure, we wouldn't, sign someone on if, like they're gonna get like, they're gonna be in the back burner, like they get like, option C. If we sign someone on, it's because it's gonna be a good fit for them and also for us. So it also comes down to maybe like the type of work. If it's going to be on demand, it's obviously like a higher priority than like work if it's going to be routed. So yeah, for sure, we wouldn't bring a shipper on if we weren't going to take care of them. And the whole process of bringing them on is because we're going to provide them that great service. And for that, it may mean something different for us. Someone may be a good fit for us, but not for someone else. And also vice versa. Someone that's like a great shipper, someone that really likes working with them, but it might not be a good fit for us.
Sure. So your company in particular, what do you guys like to specialize in delivery wise?
Right now, probably like about 80%, yeah, 80% of the work that we do is on demand. And probably like the majority of it is directly with like the shipper, the actual end user, and
Mhm.
a small portion of that is with 3PLs and a couple of freight forwarders. So that's definitely something where our strength is, because we have a larger footprint within California, especially in Southern California. There tends to be more volume and more density, which is always
Mhm.
really good. So that would be where like our specialty lies.
Sure, sure. So when you are first starting your relationship, say a shipper calls you to potentially interview to become a carrier, how do you vet them to make sure that they're a good fit for your company while they're vetting you?
Um, I feel that that was really challenging at the beginning, but just, like with time, you kind of like, I guess you can't really tell from the first phone call. Sometimes you need to dig a little deeper, because with shippers, usually the first impression is great, kind of like you're trying to make a great first impression. And
Yeah,
so
job.
they'll probably Yes, exactly. It's exactly like a job interview. And they'll promise you like, all these loads and like this great volume. But then as you're going down, like, more into like the onboarding process, then that's when you really start seeing like, okay, this is the actual like workload. And, this is exactly like where it's spread out. And this is like what the requirements would be. And so then you start seeing like the actual details of what it's going to take to actually take on that customer.
Sure, sure. So there's a few different things that play into it. How do they wait with you? So starting with the type of good being delivered, do you turn down jobs, or do you prefer certain type of jobs based on what the actual product being delivered is?
I would say probably like at the beginning, we really didn't have a preference, but now as we're growing, we're definitely oh well, especially like since last year, we're preferring like those essential items, which the majority of it is like medical, whether it's medical supplies or lab samples. So that's definitely what our preference is. But then there's also essential items like meal kits that we've been delivering. So I would say between those two is what we've really concentrated on, those essential items that have become even more essential in the last couple months.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much of it is personality? Your say your representative from that company, how much of is it working with them that goes into that relationship?
Um, I don't know. I feel like, the majority of shippers that we've dealt with have had like, they've been in the industry for a while. So I think most of them, I've heard of them before they've heard of me. So
Mhm.
it's not really more about personality. It's more, I think, of like name recognition, like, oh, that's right. I know who you are. So yeah, I don't know how much personality, plays into it, because just with my most recent experiences with shippers, it just comes down to sometimes price, which, I kind of don't like that, but it comes down to price. So I don't think personality has a lot of play into that.
Sure. Oh, there's Harold. Hey, Harold, how's it going? Oh, I think you're on mute.
My apologies for being late. Hello, everybody.
You're fine. Thank you for joining us, Harold. We've had Lorena in the hot seat for about 10 minutes now, so I'm sure she's ready for a breather. Well, Harold, why don't we go ahead and get started by introducing yourself?
So my name is Harold Boyette. My company is Blue Street Couriers, based in Jacksonville, Florida. We do a lot of stuff throughout the southeastern United States. Been in business since 1984. I'm the third owner of Blue Streak, and I celebrated my 16th anniversary February 1st of this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We'll back up a little bit. What is your opinion on the term shipper of choice? Do you believe there's such a thing?
I do. I do. There's certain shippers, and as a matter of fact, the whole reason I am late today is because my very best, absolute best customer needed something delivered, and I was completely out of drivers. So we could talk about all the things that you do for a shipper of choice. And if they're in the number one slot at the top of the list, you pretty much, if you have to, drop everything to take care of them.
Sure. So I have to ask, how did they get there? How did they get the owner of the company to become their delivery driver?
They pay me on time. They pay me fast. They do not ever file a claim. They're very low maintenance. They very rarely ask for anything at all. They're easy to get along with. They provide the data to us electronically, so they give us a picture perfect data file that we can scan against. Their exception reporting is very simplified. I can't even imagine all the other variables, but if you put all of the customers on a spectrum, for every potential variable that makes them a great customer, this customer is on the far end of that spectrum by far.
Perfect. So really being a shipper of choice is about that relationship. Lorraine and I were talking about that. How long have you worked with this particular shipper?
13 years.
Wow. So they've built up that reputation with you. You guys want to hold on to them. They want to hold on to you as a carrier, and it's become mutually beneficial.
Yes, they actually introduced us into an industry market vertical, which is now a significant part of our business. We handle hundreds of their competitors' packages, literally hundreds of competitors.
Wow. That's awesome. So how, using that knowledge of what your ideal shipper of choice looks like, when a shipper calls you, says, hey, first time talking, we're just working it out. I think Lorraine and I just equated it to a job interview. How do you use that knowledge of what makes a good shipper to vet that new shipper to see if they're going to be a good fit for your company?
I think for me, you have to understand that no matter how many questions you ask, there are always going to be a couple of questions that you don't know to ask. And you don't really know what you don't know until you get to that point in time where you realize you don't know it. So you always want to ask some open-ended questions when you're on those first dates with the customer, so to speak. And those open-ended questions allow you to learn much more at a much deeper level about what their needs are.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that if you ask those open-ended questions, they lead to other questions that lead to a very intriguing conversation that if you're really thinking hard during the conversation, you can take your experience, your knowledge of maybe that market vertical, if you're already serving other customers in that market vertical, and then just drill very, very deeply to understand what their needs are. And chances are you'll have a good idea if you're already doing business in that market vertical, what some of the basics are. So hopefully it won't be like you're chipping away forever. You should be able to quickly understand if there's something different about that customer in that market vertical that they're asking for that you might not already be familiar with.
And Lorena, back over to you. Harold just mentioned adding new verticals when shippers call needing a new service. Does your company do that often if people call for a service, explore it and try to take it on as a new service?
We did that at the beginning, but like right now we're just focusing on like the verticals that we're in. Like for example, I know, a vertical is like medical, but within medical, there's, so many things. There's like pharmaceuticals, there's like lab samples, and one of the, within medical, one of the components that we're really focusing on is fertility, for fertility clinics, fertility specimens. So that's something where we're focusing on, just because we saw like a surge of it, like after COVID or once COVID hit. It was like, oh my God, like we had no idea. It's not something that like, we kept reading about. We would talk to people, like no one was really doing that. So it was more of like, that's where we kind of see, there's a huge opportunity. But I know like when we were just starting our business, we would hear of stuff, and it would seem interesting. So we've had our hand on a couple things, but that haven't really worked out for us. What works out for some people may just not work, in our corner of California. So yeah, but for right now, a lot of people are focusing on medical, but for us, so are we, but specifically with fertility clinics.
Sure. And Harold also mentioned having a customer that pays on time. Does that go into that relationship and keeping things positive?
Oh, definitely. So right now, like all our clients are paying within 30 days, because it just comes down to the fact that the courier company, like we're the ones that are paying the drivers either weekly or bi-weekly, and we're the ones taking on most of the risk and liability. So really, we shouldn't be the last ones getting paid. I mean, I work with like a couple federal agencies, and they're notorious for, a lot of like red tape and you know processes being slow, but they're paying me within 21 days. So that's kind of like the standard now. I really don't want to work with shippers that, those credit terms have to be extended to 45 days. Right now, like our goal is within 30 days. And luckily, we haven't had any pushback within the shippers that we've been working with.
Awesome. That's great. And Harold, I want to circle back to you on something you mentioned earlier about data. Your preferred shipper that you were working with earlier today sends that data to you electronically. Can you elaborate on what that means so that other shippers understand?
So in my opinion, in today's world, there is a bar that everyone has to at least meet, and that bar is data passing back and forth between the customer and my company. So if it means, the orders are placed electronically, the proof of delivery information and exceptions are being transmitted back and forth between us and our customer, the more you can make them no touch, low maintenance, the better off you are. If you think back to the old days before we had all this technology, typical customer in our industry would have a fax machine and they would have people answering telephones. And sometimes the people answering telephones weren't just customer service, they were also the dispatcher doing it all. One call might be a driver, the next call might be a customer. And all of that, not just the labor intensive aspect of it, but the possibility for errors. Anytime you involve a human, we had a situation, this happened multiple times, where a customer calls, a fairly new CSR answers the phone. The customer says, I got to pick up. Okay. Here's the address. Okay. Well, this is a customer that has pickups coming from them going to that address. But nobody asked, what is it pickup? Can you tell me, so we're picking up from this address or are we delivering it to this address? But just the customer knows what they mean when they say, but a brand new sales rep doesn't know that, or a brand new customer service rep doesn't know that. So they call and say, I got a pickup. Okay, what's the address? Boom. Well, that's where, so next thing you know, you got a driver going to an address where they don't have a package. It's where it should have been delivered to, not where it was being picked up from. We were supposed to know that the customer that was calling was where we were supposed to go to pick up the package. So it sounds simple, but it's super goofy. But when you have that human error involved, everybody looks bad. So by having the data coming back and forth, you don't have to question where are we going to make the pickup.
Sure, that makes sense. And Lorena, how does data integrations and that data coming back and forth play into your business and your relationship with those shippers?
Yeah, it definitely makes things easier. Like I feel like in this sector of the industry, like we're all using like either one of like the 3 to 4 large dispatching software systems out there. I'm not going to name them, but we're all using one. And it's 2021, so like integrations are possible, and like all these dispatching systems like work with one another. Things like geofences are not really proprietary anymore as long as they're set up properly. So it just makes it easier once we just have like one system where we're able, and that system's able to communicate with all the other ones and give them the information that they need.
All right, Lorena, do you have a lot of companies that are requiring you to use a separate portal or use a mandated app instead of integrating directly to your system?
I only have like 2 shippers. One of them is just because it's like their accounting system, but it's where it's not really a 3PL or a freight forwarder. It's like the actual customer, and they have like all their vendors on there. So like, it's just like we have to log in like all the invoices like once a week. So that like we really don't mind, but we had an opportunity last year where it was going to be not so much a big size volume, but they wanted our drivers to use their app, and it was like I know other carriers that you use, like, are you guys making them? Like each one use like the app? It's just because, you know, one of the ways that we're able to provide shippers with flexible rates is just to take their loads and just, you know, incorporate it into our existing routes or just expand our current routes. So if we have multiple apps, you know, the driver is going to find themselves at the delivery and be like, wait, what app was I supposed to update? So, you know, it's more like a bottleneck in operations when like every single shipper wants us to use their system. It just doesn't make sense. Like we are like in talks right now with a shipper, and it's going to be like 20,000 parcels per week. And if like they're willing to integrate with our system, like I mean, it has to be some like ridiculous like volume for us to be like, you know what? Yep, we'll use your system. You know, it just has to like make financial sense.
Sure, sure. And Harold, you mentioned that baseline for your customers. Are you guys using any portals or apps for your drivers?
A couple of our customers have a portal, but
Mhm.
my favorite customers' portals integrate with our system. Also, we also have customers that may or may not have their own handheld technology or delivery app. But again, my favorite customers integrate with ours, and it's amazing how some of the customers that have their own driver app, they truly believe it is the best thing on the planet, that is far superior to anything that anybody else could ever think about coming up with. And so it's a little challenging because you can't really say your baby's ugly. You can't really, you have to be able to say, okay, we can work with that if that's the requirement. So we have a couple of customers where we do have our drivers that have to access this other app, but we also require our driver to process the order in our app as well, so that we have 100% population compliance of every order that goes through our system, which is very cumbersome for the driver. But it is what it is. If it builds route density and it's a street or a neighborhood he's already in or she is already in for doing other deliveries, then we'll push through the pain.
Sure. And does that extra step in there, does that affect costs? Does that affect your operations? You said cumbersome. Does it slow things down and affect efficiency?
I think bottleneck, Lorena's term bottleneck was spot on. It definitely makes things a little, I use the word clunky when the driver's out on the road, and sometimes when you're in front of a customer and you're trying to work through two apps, you have to, if you do it enough times, you can be tactful enough so it's not embarrassing.
Sure.
So
Sure. So we've talked about pricing, getting paid on time, making sure that the shipper is willing to pay you and pay you on time, electronic deliver data, moving back and forth for visibility, letting you guys control that data operationally so you can control your drivers and see everything going through. We talked about density and that being a priority. Now, if you were to, Lorraine, I'll start with you, tell a shipper one thing about working with you and improving that relationship. I know this is very generic because there's a bunch of different kinds of shippers, 3PLs, freight forwarders, retailers, but what would you like to tell them about building a better relationship with their carriers?
I think one thing for sure is just putting yourself in the place of the carrier, just you know, the liability that we're taking on. And I work with some great shippers that, you know, totally get it, but then there's other shippers that are just more driven by price. So like one of the common things in our industry is just to have like a flat rate for work done after hours. So I'm in California, so we're still transitioning from an IC fleet over to employee drivers. So now we can't really have a flat rate for orders that are, you know, done after hours, or, you know, if it's something like at 2 a.m., it has to be double time. So I feel like, you know, everybody in the industry knows about AB5 and just other labor issues in California. But shippers with like offices in the Midwest or further east, they know about it, but aren't really living it. So those are the shippers that have been giving us pushback. There's a couple shippers that I work with that actually have physical offices here in California, so they get it, and I've been able, you know, to come to terms because that does increase the price and it decreases their margins, but it's something that like I really have no control over. So there's only so much of a flexible price that we could provide, you know, as it relates to good service. So It's just, you know, some formula that we have to come up with. But that's definitely like one of them, for sure, taking into account the liability that we have and those labor laws that are out there that, you know, we can't ignore.
Mhm. Yeah, do you see, especially in California, because your laws are different than the rest of the states right now, do you see a lot of shippers leaning on you to give that information, to share your knowledge on your geographical area, or do you see a lot of them assuming you're like everybody else?
I am not sure. I think that just the shippers that we're working with, it's just, or the new ones that we've taken on, we've just had really like great relationships with them. And we just, you know, make sure that they know everything that's happening. This is why like we haven't made it, you know, too far in with certain shippers, like in the vetting process, because they can't really twist our arm too much when it comes to pricing, because these are just things that like, you know, it may seem like great volume, but like, what are the margins? Like, that's something that you just can't ignore.
Sure. No, that makes complete sense. And Harold, same first question for you. If you could tell a shipper one thing that they could do to improve that relationship with the carrier, what would you tell them?
Leverage my network. You know, here's what I can do. Leverage it for your company to help you grow your business. Leverage it for your company to help you meet your customers' needs. Leverage it for your company to help your sales force. So I try and lay it out there as something that is a tool that they can use to help them meet their objectives. And when I do it that way, they're trying to meet my data requirements or meet my information requirements of things that I need to have access to. You know, things as simple as a phone number for a delivery for a consignee. You want me to do a great job for you, please include that on the label and in the data. And if my driver's having trouble making a delivery, every one of my folks know, look for a phone number and don't just call it, because the customer's going to think it's spam. They're not going to answer it. Text the customer. We have canned messages that we have our drivers text the customer if we're trying to, it's residential delivery, trying to get through a gate code, you know, through a gate secured access, or whatever that may be. But the bottom line is, to answer the question, leverage me, leverage what we can do for you.
Sure. Well, Lorena and Harold, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you guys sharing your experience and everything with everybody who is here. We are going to be sending out the recording of the webinar, and in that recording we'll include Lorena and Harold's company information and their LinkedIn, so you guys can connect with them on there and learn more about them there. If you enjoyed the webinar, please pass it along to your coworkers, and thank you again for coming. We appreciate your time. Y'all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.